It had been raining heavily for 4 days in a row in my small town. This little town never had any intense rain like this before. The flood started on the second day, but the level was bearable. It was on the third day that the water level forced many residents to evacuate. The elderly, women and children, were evacuated first. But before most of them were able to be evacuated, the weather turned bad again. Heavy rain and wind forced the rescuers to retreat. The water level quickly rose, and by the fourth day, in early morning, we were on our rooftops. Those who had second floor in their house were lucky because they still have roof on top of their head. They helped their neighbors who were stranded on the rooftops too. I myself were among the unlucky ones, having no second floor, and none of my neighbors have second floor. But thankfully, my wife and my 7-year-old son were already evacuated yesterday just in time when the weather turned bad. I was alone with my 5-year-old German Shepherd, Targa, on my rooftop with whatever supplies I could salvage from downstairs, which is now underwater. Targa is a fearless dog and can swim. In fact, he loves the swimming pool, so I don't have to worry about him drowning should the water keep rising. That day the weather is still very bad. I was in my raincoat with an umbrella, and I covered my dog with large piece of plastic just to keep him dry. The flood was quite still. It was moving very slowly and the water was murky, but not murky because of mud or soil. The water was kind of black like an industrial water waste. It's strange because there are no factories around my town. The water just looked disgusting, but at least it didn't smell. I was thinking how much cleaning we have to do after the water subsides. Other than being accompanied by my loyal dog, a lot of my neighbors were also stranded on their rooftops, so we weren't feeling so lonely. Things changed a bit better when the sun went down. The rain stopped, and there was a moonlight. We could even see the stars. If this continues tomorrow, I'm looking forward to get off from my roof. As there was nothing to do, I decided to sleep early. Or at least tried to sleep. How did I sleep on my rooftop? Well, I let you figure that out yourself. But it wasn't comfortable. Amazingly, I fell asleep. I didn't know how long I was asleep. I couldn't even tell the time, but was awakened when Targa was barking. He was barking and looked towards the water. I said, "What's wrong?" But he just kept barking. His tail wasn't wagging. And then he started barking towards the water on both sides of my roof. It seemed that there was something in the water on both sides of my roof. But I didn't see anything. The moonlight was still bright, so I had no problem looking at even 4 or 5 neighbors away. And then I heard other dogs barking from the distance. Some neighbor also had dogs, but I wasn't sure whether they barked in reaction to my Targa or they were barking at the water. Targa's barking became more intense to the point that he wanted to go after something. I quickly held Targa in my arm because I don't want him to slip into that dirty water. Other dogs were also heard barking more and more intensely. My neighbors who don't have dogs began asking me what's going on. I asked them if they see anything in the water, and they said they see nothing. Some neighbors own huskies, and they too started howling. So imagine, we had a full moon, dark murky slow-moving flood around you, and dogs barking and howling in the middle of the night. We had no idea what's going on, but it was frightening. Soon after, from a distance, a woman screamed. Then voices of men swearing out. "Oh shit, oh my God, what the hell is that?" Me and my neighbors looked at each other, and we still don't see anything in the water. I could literally feel my neck hair and arms hair were standing. I know that all the neighbors were separated by the flood, but we didn't feel so far away apart until now because the situation is getting scarier. Then my neighbor shouted, "Oh my God, oh my God." And then I saw something began to appear from the surface of the water. Something floating. Is it a dead body? I wasn't sure because I had to rely on the moonlight and the water was dark. Then my neighbor shouted, "It's a dead body!" If my neighbor saw a dead body floating in front of his roof, then what was in front of my roof? Another dead body? 2 dead bodies? And what about other neighbors who were shouting and swearing? What did they see? I looked at the other side of my roof, and there was something floating too. This time, the view was clearer. It was a dead body. My eyes were wide open. The sight sent the most horrible chill throughout my body. As I was staring at the dead body passing very slowly in front of my roof, my jaw dropped. Another dead body suddenly floated. And then, another dead body. And then another. And then another. Dozens of dead bodies appeared from the surface of the water. I looked at other sides of my roof, and I realized that I was surrounded by floating dead bodies that came out of nowhere. And so were my neighbors. It looked like a massacre and the dead bodies had been dumped into the water. My neighbors were swearing and shouting in disbelief. Targo was still barking and I kept hugging him tightly as if he was the only family I've got. And then, the smell came. I don't really know what a rotten meat smells like, but I guess that was what we were smelling that night. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why so many of them? I mean, a lot of them. What also scared me was that the flood flow didn't bring the dead bodies here, the dead bodies just floated from under the flood. After half an hour, the shock that hit the neighborhood subsided, but the dogs were still barking and howling. My neighbors and I were still glued to the horrific sight. And then I had the scariest imagination. What if those dead bodies suddenly move and swim toward everyone's roof and start climbing? I snapped out of my imagination. I then started talking with my neighbor. We had to shout a little bit because of our distance apart. We had no idea how many dead bodies were there because it wasn't just me and my next neighbors experiencing this. Judging from the dogs that were still barking and howling from a distance away, a wide area of the neighborhood seemed to be experiencing this horror. There must be hundreds or thousands of dead bodies floating in the area. Eventually, the dogs grew tired of barking and howling. One by one, the dogs went silent, and still, the dead bodies kept passing all around us. Where's the tail end of this flotilla of the dead? Without the noise of the dogs, the night became frighteningly quiet. The quietness led to my drowsiness, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was almost sunrise. I immediately looked down at the water. There were no dead bodies. The water hadn't subsided and was still murky black. Targo was still asleep. I guess he stayed up late through the night. I looked at my neighbors. Many were sleeping, but a few were awake. I called them and asked when did the flotilla end. They all didn't know because they just woke up. When the sun was just half above the horizon, we saw rescue boats coming into the area. We were all very relieved. Before noon, everyone stranded on the rooftops and second floors were evacuated. At the evacuation center, me and hundreds of residents reported the horror that night to the authority. The authority quickly followed up on our report. After days of searching, including aerial search by helicopters, they found nothing. Every one of us didn't know when the dead body flotilla ended because we all fell asleep. When the flood subsided, there was nothing, no trace, no sign of those dead bodies, where they came from, where they went, or who they were. What we had were hundreds of legitimate eyewitnesses. Or are we all just a bunch of crazy people making up stories?
It was 10 o'clock in the evening and time for me to go home now. I'm a doctor in a local hospital and I had been working there for almost 10 years. The hospital had been busy in the past few days because of the rain and flood, but most of the patients coming here suffered no serious illness or injuries. And that's a good thing because I could go home and don't have to stand by in the hospital for the whole night. As I looked out of my office window, the rain was still pouring, and the flood covered the road and pedestrian right in front of the hospital. The flood was high enough to easily disable any sedans, but if you're driving an SUV, you could still go around most of the city. Luckily, I just traded my sedan for a second-hand Chevrolet Tahoe just 3 months ago. The car was only 3 years old, so I'm pretty sure this bad boy can withstand the flood better than any car. As I was driving slowly through the flood, I couldn't help thinking how enjoyable it was. I was enjoying my drive. I was smiling while my SUV was swimming smoothly through the flood. The street lights were all working normally, so the streets wasn't dark and spooky, even though it was very quiet. It was 10:30 after all. There were some cars left stranded here and there. Apparently the drivers were trying to brave the flood with their sedans. How silly, I thought. Also, there were police in their SUVs still patrolling the streets. Other than that, there was no one outside on the streets. It was a scenery that you don't get to see every day. It gave me a weird feeling, but it wasn't bad. As I was driving, I reached the underpass tunnel that I usually had to pass through. The tunnel's about a quarter mile or 400 meters in length with 4 lanes, so it's a pretty long and wide tunnel. I stopped my car right about in front of the tunnel. The tunnel was bright, all the lights were on, but, yes, you guessed it, it was flooded. I pass this tunnel on a daily basis, and I was trying to assess how deep the flood was. It was a guessing game, because there were no cars stranded in there. After a brief thinking, I decided to go ahead and drive through the tunnel. When I reached the quarter length of the tunnel, I knew that the road doesn't go any lower than this. I guess the waterline was about an adult's waist. I was relieved because the waterline was still a little below the limit of my SUV. I drove slowly, making sure the water doesn't go up my car hood. But suddenly, my engine went into hiccups. Hey, what's going on here? Then my engine died. What? Aw, come on. I turned off all the electronics and tried starting her up again. After several attempts, she still wouldn't start. Damn it. I'm pretty sure my car is still high enough to go through this flood. The battery was still on. I was still able to turn on the lights and radio. I decided to call 911 for help, and they said they're sending a tow truck. Oh good, because I thought they're just gonna rescue me with a rubber boat. Instead, they're gonna rescue my car as well. I listened to the radio while I was waiting for the help to come. Then, I saw something in my rearview mirror. It seemed like someone is standing in the flood. I turned around, and yes, there was someone standing outside in the flood. Some 100 feet or 30 meters away behind my car. I rolled down my window, put my head out, and shouted, "Are you all right? You can come over into my car." But the person didn't reply. I took a close look at that person. It looked like a female. Short blonde hair, wearing red dress. I wasn't able to see her face even though the tunnel was well lit. Then suddenly, she went down and disappeared into the flood. No, she didn't fall and drown. She just slowly went down vertically into the flood as if there was a hole underneath her. What the hell's going on here? I kept looking at the spot even though she was no longer there. I thought that if this is a prank, whoever that is, would reappear and gasping for air. Yeah, let's see if you can hold your breath in this dirty, murky flood water. I thought. I waited for 3 minutes. Nothing. I pulled myself back into my car and I saw her again, in front of my car at around the same distance. Something's weird here. I put out my head out again and shouted, "Are you okay? I can call for help." Again she didn't reply, and again she went down and disappeared into the murky water. I immediately got a goosebump. I got back into my car, closed the window, locked the doors, and turned off the radio. My head, my neck, and my eyeballs were turning left and right, trying to see what's going on next. It was just silently eerie both in my car and in the tunnel. I was anticipating the tunnel would go dark suddenly. I grabbed my phone and get ready to turn on the flashlight. Suddenly I felt a bump on the left side of my car. And then, a bump on the right side. The bumping on either side of my car were getting more and more intense. And then my car was shaking side to side as if there was an earthquake. I hit my horn. I wasn't sure if the horn would work, but it did. I kept honking. But my car shook even more intensely. Oof and ouch was all I can say. I decided to call 911 again. As I was going through my phone's menu, my car took a hard hit from the back. I was thrown back to my seat, and my phone flew over to the rear seat. Oh shit! I turned around trying to think whether or not I should climb over to the rear to get my phone back. But before I could take action, the right side of my car began to lift up. My car tilted more than 45 degrees to the left. A Chevrolet Tahoe weighs around 2.8 tons. This is a very heavy car. I don't know how it was lifted, but then my car fell into a free fall. Bang! As soon as the car stabilized, it tilted to the right, again around 45 degrees. And then another free fall. Bang! The side airbags burst. My car tilted from side to side in free fall like that several times. I shook violently in my seat. This heavy car was being played around like a toy car. But my car was the only thing protecting me. I shouted in horror as I covered my head with my arms and hands because the airbags were already deflated. At times, I hit my head on the side window. Suddenly, it stopped. I lied back on my seat, panting in horror. I don't know what's next, but I was expecting another violent attack. I could hear nothing but the sound of small waves hitting both sides of my car. What came through my mind? Hell, I don't know. I just want to get out of here. I waited and waited. I was still expecting my car to be attacked violently. But, suddenly, I saw an arm rising right in front of my car. The arm and hand landed on the hood. And then another arm and hand rose and landed on the hood. There were red bruises all over the coarse pale skin. Then the head rose slowly, revealing the dirty wet blonde hair first. As the head was rising higher, I could see the face for the first time. I froze on my seat and was completely horrified. It's definitely a woman. Like the hands and arms, there were bloody bruises on her coarse pale face, and her eyes were completely black. As she was climbing on my car's hood, I quickly tried to restart my car's engine. Come on, come on, come on. It wouldn't start. When I looked up, she was already on the hood of my car. She was staring at me. She took a long stare at me. She then moved forward closer to my windshield, as if trying to take a closer look at me. And then, she tilted her head, as if something is puzzling her. She pulled back and took a look at the hood of my car, and then the left side and right side of my car. She paused for a moment, and then she plunged back into the water. I just froze on my seat and waited what would come next. A few seconds later, my car engine started. I was completely stunned because I didn't even touch the ignition. What? Oh, thank God. The engine started on its own. I didn't think for too long. I didn't waste time. I put the gear on drive and step on the gas. In about a minute, I got myself at the end of the tunnel. I was so relieved to get out of the tunnel. I passed the tow truck as it was driving into the tunnel. The tow truck honked, but I didn't respond. I kept driving until I was finally out of the flooded area and safely reached my house 20 minutes later.
I've been working at a search and rescue agency for over 3 years, and my division is urban flood disaster relief. The global warming has made this particular division busier than ever, especially in this country. Last year, my team and I was assigned to a suburb ravaged by torrential rain and rapidly rising water. The rain was non-stop, and the wind was strong. Also, our helicopter fleet proved to be less useful because this suburb is covered with lots of thick trees. Sometimes we can't even see the house from the air. Rescuing people who were stranded on their rooftops in this situation was particularly hard. So we had to rely on our rescue boats. Luckily, there was one day that gave us an opportunity to rescue the people from their homes, but the weather forecast said that torrential rain may pour again in the afternoon. So we had to move quickly. On that day, we started right at sunrise. We dispatched 27 motorized boats rescuing hundreds of residents from their homes. By noon, heavy cloud blanketed the suburb, and at 1 o'clock, heavy rain poured with strong winds. This time extreme lighting hit the area. We were relieved that we rescued everyone just in time. Imagine people stranded on their rooftops and got lightning strike. The rain kept pouring until about 6 o'clock. When the rain stopped, we decided to go back and patrol the area. We knew that we had rescued everyone, but just in case there were dogs or cats left behind that need to be rescued. 10 boats were dispatched for patrol. Me and my 2 colleagues set off to the flooded suburban area with our boat. When we arrived, the area wasn't dark yet as it was dusk, but it was very quiet. Not a single sound except for the sound of our low-revving engine. We slowly maneuver the boat to search for anything or anyone left behind. 40 minutes into patrolling, we heard a depressing news over our radio. One of our colleagues who was patrolling in the other area had drowned. He drowned while rescuing a survivor in the water. His colleagues couldn't rescue him. Other boats arrived at the scene and they couldn't find the body. The flood water level was around 2 floors high. It was deep and very murky, but it was calm. We were silent for a while because we knew the guy who had drowned. But we couldn't help thinking, how could he drown? He was not a rookie, he was a good swimmer, and every one of us were wearing life jacket. And the survivor who was in the water drowned too with his rescuer. Did the survivor drag him down? It didn't make any sense to us. No other details were given over the radio. We thought there might be more information once we get back to our station. We patrolled for another 20 minutes, and there was nothing to pick up. Seemed like no one was left behind. No dogs, no cats, or other animals. So we decided to go back to our station. We kept our speed low just in case we find or heard something on the way back to the station. It was almost dark, but we were not in a hurry. Then, one of us heard something. We turned our engine off and listened carefully. There it was. A cry for help. Someone was shouting for help. It was from a distance, but we managed to get the direction. We started our engine and headed to that direction. Again, it was almost dark, so we turned on our spotlight and directed the light towards the roofs, trees, or anything above the water. We shouted that we're coming to help, but there was no reply. We kept shouting, telling the survivor to make any sound. But still, there was no reply, no sound from anyone or anything. Then we heard the cry again, "Help! Help!" But it was from another direction. We immediately went to that direction. We shouted again, "We're coming! We're rescuers! Where are you?" There was no reply. We shut off our engine and listened carefully. This time we heard it again, calling for help. But it was from the direction where we first came. The three of us looked at each other. The voice sounds like the same person, but how can it be in different location? We started our engine and head back to the previous location. When we arrived, we shouted again. And again, there was no reply. We searched carefully. We looked at every roofs, every windows, trees, traffic light poles, nothing. And then, something caught my eyes. About 30 feet or 10 meters away, I could see a hand, waiting just above the waterline. I shouted, "Over there!" It seems someone is already drowning. We rushed to the location. We cannot lose a survivor. Not on our watch. My friend directed the spotlight towards the hand. I decided that I was going to be the one who would pull the survivor out from the water first. As we came closer, the hand was waving. Strange thing about the hand. It was dark gray in color and very wrinkled, as if it had been in the water for hours. But I didn't think too much. A rescue is a rescue. Humans or animals, I'm gonna rescue them. As I reached the hand, I grabbed it, and it grabbed my hand too. My other hand grabbed the wrist. And I was ready to pull the survivor out of the water. You know, when you're gonna pull something, and you know it's going to be heavy, you can anticipate how much power you need to pull that heavy thing, right? I've pulled survivors out of the water so many times before, so I know how much power I need to pull this one out. But not this time. As I pulled the hand, I was struck by how light it was. I ended up putting too much power pulling the hand, then I fell back onto my boat. As I fell onto the boat, I saw a horrendous sight. I wasn't pulling somebody, I was pulling an arm. I was pulling one whole arm with no torso. That one whole arm then fell right beside me. The arm looked rotten. It looked horrendous. The hand of that arm was still holding my hand tightly. My friends were shouting in horror. "Oh shit! What the hell is that?" I was absolutely horrified. I shook my hand hard trying to release myself, but it gripped my hand even tighter. It horrified me even more. I was panicking as I continued shaking my hand fiercely. I shouted, "Get it off me! Get it off me!" My friend fiercely kicked the arm, but it was still gripping my hand. He then stomped the arm. He kept stomping the arm hard until it released my hand. I moved away from the hand and we could see the hand was moving. My friend instinctively took the arm and threw it back into the water. The three of us were panting and looked in horror at the dark, blackish-brown water where the arm plunged. And then my friend yelled, "Let's get out of here!" We went full speed on our boat back to the station. Along the way, my friends were still swearing in disbelief. Back at the station, we reported the horrific experience to our superior. We weren't sure whether he's gonna believe our story, but we told him anyway. We were horrified when he told us that our description of the arm matched with the description of the arm that pulled our colleague off the boat and drowned. I wonder why the arm didn't pull me off the boat, but I sure am glad to still be alive.
Hi, welcome to our YouTube channel, Souls Around You, and thank you for listening to our horror stories. We have more stories in our channel, so if you like it, please subscribe and press the like button. Your subscription and likes are very rewarding for us.